The French Foreign Legion doesn't accept failures. It doesn't accept quitters. It doesn't accept men who can't adapt to anything, any climate, any mission, any impossible circumstance. For 190 years, since its founding in 1831, the Legion Étrangère has taken broken men from broken countries and forged them into something harder than steel. Men who march 50 kilometers with full packs in the scorching Sahara. Men who fight in deserts and jungles and mountains without complaint. Men whose motto, Legio Patria Nostra, the Legion is our fatherland, isn't just words but a blood oath. The Legion doesn't care who you were, only who you become. Criminals become soldiers. Drifters become warriors. Lost souls become brothers. And those who survive the brutal training, the crushing physical demands, the psychological testing, the weeks in the desert that break most men, those who survive earn the right to wear the kepi blanc, the white cap, the symbol recognized worldwide as belonging to one of the most elite fighting forces on earth. Jean-Claude Mercier had been Legion for 25 years. 2E Regiment Étranger de Parachutistes. 2E REP, the Legion's elite parachute regiment based in Calvi, Corsica. The unit that France called when the regular military wasn't enough. When missions required men who could operate in any environment, under any conditions, without support. Algeria in the 1970s, when the region was tearing itself apart and France needed someone to stabilize the chaos. Jean-Claude had been 23 years old, fresh from Legion training, when he'd made his first combat jump into hostile territory. Chad in the 1980s, fighting in Operation Manta and Operation Epervier. Desert warfare, temperatures that reached 50 degrees Celsius. Rebel forces that used terror tactics against civilians. Jean-Claude and his Legion brothers had been there for years, doing the dirty work that kept Central Africa from collapsing completely. Rwanda in 1994. The genocide. When the world watched and did nothing, the French Foreign Legion went in. Operation Turquoise. Jean-Claude had been 41 years old then, a senior officer, leading men through hell to save civilians from machete-wielding militias. Bosnia after that. Sarajevo. Srebrenica. The places where Europe's ugliest war since 1945 was fought. The Legion had been there too. 25 years. More missions than Jean-Claude could count. More firefights than he could remember. Friends lost. Enemies killed. Medals earned from a grateful French government that publicly never acknowledged what the Legion did in the shadows. He'd carried his kepi blanc with pride. Had worn his parachutist wings with honor. Had been everything the Legion demanded. Disciplined, capable, absolutely loyal. Then mandatory retirement at 55. The age when even the Legion, which pushed men harder than any military on earth, said your body couldn't take it anymore. Jean-Claude had returned to Normandy, his home region, where his grandparents had lived through German occupation, where American soldiers had landed on June 6, 1944, to liberate France at terrible cost. He'd taken a simple job as a groundskeeper at the Normandy American Cemetery in Colleville-sur-Mer, the sacred ground overlooking Omaha Beach, where 9,387 white crosses and stars of David marked the graves of American soldiers who died for French freedom. That was 15 years ago. Now Jean-Claude Mercier was 70 years old. Gray hair beneath his weathered cap. Hands gnarled from years of gardening work. Slow-moving. Quiet. The old French groundskeeper that American tourists smiled at politely and then forgot. Nobody knew about the Legion years. The cemetery staff knew he'd been military. He'd needed to show his service record for the job. But they thought he'd been regular French army. Some administrative post, probably. Not worth asking about. Nobody looked at the 70-year-old gardener with dirt under his fingernails and saw the warrior underneath, which suited Jean-Claude fine. The Legion had taught him many things over 25 years. How to kill efficiently in close quarters. How to survive in any terrain. How to lead men through impossible situations. But it had also taught him this: invisible men survive longest. So Jean-Claude kept his head down, tended his graves with obsessive care, spoke broken English to American visitors, and seemed like exactly what he appeared to be, a harmless old Frenchman doing simple work. Until this Tuesday morning, June 6, 2024, the 80th anniversary of D-Day, when 4 terrorists attacked the cemetery during the memorial ceremony with one goal: kill American generals on sacred ground and send a message to the world about Western weakness. They saw Jean-Claude and dismissed him immediately. Just another old man. Too old to be a threat. Too slow to matter. They didn't know about the Legion. They didn't know about 2EREP. They didn't know that Legio Patria Nostra wasn't just a motto. It was a promise that lasted until death. And Jean-Claude Mercier, 70 years old, former Legion Étrangere, was standing at his post, among 9,387 American graves, on sacred ground, where boys braver than these terrorists had died for freedom. The Legion didn't abandon the dead. Not at 70. Not ever. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Army Story so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Jean-Claude's workday began the same way it had for 32 years. 0600 hours. Old habits from Legion days. Arrive before sunrise. Inspect the grounds. Plan the day's work. The Normandy American Cemetery was 172 acres of immaculate green lawn overlooking the English Channel. The 9,387 graves arranged in perfect rows. The memorial colonnade. The chapel. The Garden of the Missing, where the names of 1,557 American soldiers whose bodies were never recovered were inscribed on the walls. It was Jean-Claude's responsibility to keep it perfect. Not officially. There were younger groundskeepers who did most of the heavy work now. But Jean-Claude still walked every row, still checked every grave, still trimmed grass with scissors when the mower didn't get close enough to the headstones. Bonjour, mes Amos, he murmured in French as he walked through Section E. Good morning, my friends. The cemetery staff thought it was charming. The old man who talked to the graves. Eccentric, but harmless. They didn't understand that these weren't just graves to Jean-Claude. They were his post. The Legion had taught him, you never abandon your post. Never surrender. Never let the enemy take what you're tasked to defend. For 32 years, Jean-Claude had defended this ground. Not from armies, from weather, from weeds, from the slow decay that claimed all things if not tended carefully. These American boys had died liberating his country. The least he could do was keep their graves beautiful. Monsieur Mercier, the cemetery director, a woman named Marie Laurent, waved from the memorial building. The ceremony preparations. Can you help move chairs? Oui, madame, Jean-Claude called back, his English heavily accented as always. I am coming. He moved slowly, deliberately, played the part of the old man whose body couldn't do what it used to do, which was partly true. He was 70. His knees did hurt. His back did ache in the mornings. But the Legion trained men to operate through pain, to ignore physical discomfort, to complete the mission regardless of circumstances. Jean-Claude could still move when he needed to. He just didn't need to. Not yet. By 0900 hours, the cemetery was filling with visitors. It was June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day. And this year was special, the 80th anniversary. 80 years since American soldiers had stormed Omaha Beach in the dawn light, dying by the hundreds to establish a foothold in Nazi-occupied France. 3 American generals were scheduled to speak. 50 American veterans, men in their late 90s and hundreds, the last survivors of D-Day, were being honored. French officials, press, hundreds of visitors. Security was tight, or what passed for tight at a cemetery. Armed French police at the gates. Private security throughout the grounds. Metal detectors at the entrance. Jean-Claude watched the security setup with professional eyes. Noted the gaps, the blind spots, the places where someone with training could breach if they wanted to. But he said nothing, because groundskeepers didn't give security advice. Groundskeepers stayed quiet and invisible. Excuse me, old man, a young American Marine in dress blues said, not unkindly. He was maybe 25. Probably hadn't deployed yet. Didn't have the look of someone who'd seen combat. Could you move? We're setting up the honor guard here. Ah oui. Yes, sorry, Jean-Claude said, shuffling aside with his rake. The Marine didn't give him a second glance. Just another old French maintenance worker. Part of a landscape. Jean-Claude had been invisible for so long, he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as anything else. Almost. Algeria. Night operation. 1973. Caporal Chef Jean-Claude Mercier, 23 years old, 2 ERP. Moved through the Algerian village with his squad. 12 legionnaires. All of them silent. All of them deadly. The mission was simple. Rescue 3 French aid workers kidnapped by militants. Intel said they were being held in a compound on the edge of the village. Armed guards. Hostages in the center building. Standard hostage rescue. The kind of mission 2 ERP specialized in. Jean-Claude was point man. First through every door. The position that required the most skill and took the most risk. Breach. The whispered command came over his radio. Jean-Claude moved to the door, planted the breaching charge, stepped aside. The explosion was controlled. Professional. The door blew inward. Jean-Claude flowed through the smoke. MAT-49 submachine gun, the Legion's preferred weapon in close quarters, up and ready. First hostile. 2 shots. Down. Second hostile. Turning. Weapon rising. Jean-Claude was faster. 3 shots. Down. The room cleared in 4.2 seconds. Clear. His squad flowed through behind him, moving through the compound like water. Violence that was controlled, surgical, absolutely professional. They found the 3 aid workers in the back room, terrified, unharmed, alive. The mission was over in 8 minutes from breach to exfil. 0 Legion casualties. 3 hostages saved. 6 militants dead. When they returned to base, the colonel had pulled Jean-Claude aside. Mercier, you're good at this. Thank you, sir. No, I mean very good. I'm recommending you for promotion. And for jump school. You belong in the parachutists. Jean-Claude had earned his parachutist wings 6 months later. Had spent the next 24 years jumping out of airplanes into hostile territory, doing the missions that regular French military couldn't or wouldn't do. Algeria, Chad, Rwanda, Bosnia. 25 years of being the tip of the spear. 25 years of never failing a mission. 25 years of being very, very good at controlled violence. Present day, 1,000 hours. The 80th D-Day anniversary ceremony began. 300 folding chairs arranged on the lawn facing the memorial colonnade. American and French flags everywhere. A military band playing the national anthems, La Marseillaise, followed by the Star-Spangled Banner. Jean-Claude stood at the back, near his gardening equipment. Invisible, part of the background. Major General Patricia Morrison, U.S. Army, stepped to the podium. 3 stars on her uniform. Distinguished career. Jean-Claude had seen her file earlier when the security team was reviewing VIP information. Old habits from Legion intelligence days. 80 years ago today, General Morrison began. 9,000 American soldiers landed on this beach. By nightfall, more than 2,000 of them were dead or wounded. But they held. They pushed forward. They liberated France and helped free Europe from Nazi tyranny. The crowd listened in reverent silence. Jean-Claude looked at the graves, at the white crosses stretching in perfect rows, at the boys who'd been 19 and 20 and 21 when they died. So young, he thought. So brave. He'd been a soldier for 25 years. Had seen men die in Algeria and Chad and Rwanda. Had carried brothers who'd fallen. Had killed enemies who'd threatened civilians. But these American boys had come across an ocean. Had died for a country that wasn't theirs. For people they'd never met. That deserved respect. That deserved honor. That deserved protection. Which was why Jean-Claude had spent 32 years tending their graves. The ceremony continued. Speeches. A wreath laying. The 50 American D-Day veterans, ancient men in wheelchairs, the last witnesses to history, being honored with medals. Jean-Claude watched, listened, stayed invisible. Then, at 1037 hours, he heard something that shouldn't be there. A sound. Faint. Wrong. His Legion training kicked in immediately. Threat assessment. Tactical awareness. The sixth sense that kept soldiers alive in combat zones. Jean-Claude scanned the perimeter. Saw nothing obvious. But the sound. There. Movement in the tree line beyond the cemetery wall. 4 figures. Moving with purpose. Carrying something. Murd, Jean-Claude thought. Shit. He pulled out his ancient flip phone. He'd never upgraded to a smartphone, and dialed the security office. "Oui, hello," he said in his heavily accented English. "This is Jean-Claude, Z groundskeeper. I see something." The first explosion cut him off. Not inside the cemetery. At the front gate. A vehicle-borne IED. Jean-Claude's mind cataloged immediately, taking out the security checkpoint. Screaming. Panic. People running. Then the 4 figures breached the tree line. Automatic weapons. Black tactical gear. Moving with military precision toward the ceremony. Terrorists. Professional ones. Jean-Claude's phone was still connected. "For hostiles," he said into it, his accent dropping slightly. "Armed. Military training. Breaching from the east perimeter." "What? Who is?" Jean-Claude hung up. No time for explanations. The terrorists reached the ceremony crowd. Started firing into the air. Hurting people. Professional hostage-taking. "Everybody down," one shouted in accented English. "American generals. Where are the American generals?" This wasn't random. This was targeted. An assassination attempt on sacred ground. Jean-Claude watched from his position near the equipment shed. Assessed. Calculated. Security forces were down. The front gate explosion had taken them out. Police would respond, but it would take 10 minutes minimum to mobilize the proper response. The terrorists had 3 American generals and 50 elderly D-Day veterans at gunpoint. Nobody was coming in time. Jean-Claude looked at his rake, at his gardening gloves, at the 70-year-old body reflected in the shed's window. Then he looked at the graves, at the 9,387 white crosses, at the boys who died liberating France. Legio Patria Nostra. The Legion is our fatherland. But these graves were his responsibility. Jean-Claude Mercier took off his gardening gloves and became Legion again. The equipment shed where Jean-Claude kept his tools also contained something the cemetery administration didn't know about. A small footlocker, locked, hidden behind bags of fertilizer. Jean-Claude opened it now. Inside, a Palmas G1 pistol, the French military sidearm. 15 rounds. He'd kept it from his Legion days. Technically illegal to have it, but old habits died hard. Also inside, his kepi blanc, the white kepi of the Foreign Legion, folded carefully, worn but maintained. Jean-Claude picked up the kepi, held it for a moment. 32 years since he'd worn it. 15 years since retirement. He was 70 years old now. Not the young legionnaire who jumped into Algeria at 23. But the training didn't leave. The skills didn't evaporate. The mindset, the absolute refusal to surrender, to quit, to let the enemy win, that stayed forever. He put on the kepi blanc, loaded the pistol, chambered around, looked at himself in the shed's small mirror. A 70-year-old man in a groundskeeper's uniform and a white Legion kepi. It should have looked absurd. It looked terrifying. Jean-Claude left the shed and moved toward the ceremony ground. Not with the shuffle of an old groundskeeper, with the controlled, economical movement of a legionnaire on mission. The terrorists had everyone on the ground. 300 civilians, 3 generals, 50 ancient veterans. "We have a message for America," one terrorist was shouting into a camera his partner held. "Your generals will die on the graves of your soldiers. This is what happens when—" "Excusez-moi," Jean-Claude said from behind them. Perfect French. No accent. Command voice. All 4 terrorists turned. Saw an old man in a white kepi. Looked confused. Then Jean-Claude spoke in Arabic, The language he'd learned in Algeria 50 years ago. You made a mistake coming here. The lead terrorist's eyes widened. Recognized the kepi. Understood what it meant. Legion, he whispered. Legio Patria Nostra, Jean-Claude replied. Then switched to French. The Legion is our fatherland. But this cemetery is my post. And you don't desecrate the graves I protected for 32 years. You're one old man. Jean-Claude moved. 70 years old. Bad knees. Aching back. But Legion training transcended age. The first terrorist died before he understood what was happening. Jean-Claude closed the distance in 3 steps, faster than his age should have allowed, and put 2 rounds through the terrorist's chest at contact distance. Legion CQB. Close quarters battle. The fighting style that had been refined over 190 years of wars in every environment imaginable. No fancy martial arts. No movie choreography. Just brutal, efficient violence designed to end threats as quickly as possible. The second terrorist swung his AK-47 toward Jean-Claude. Too slow. Jean-Claude had cleared buildings in Rwanda while men half his age hesitated. He didn't hesitate now. Sidestepped inside the weapon's arc, struck the terrorist's throat with a precise blow that crushed the windpipe. As the man gagged and fell, Jean-Claude took the AK-47 and put a round through the third terrorist's head. 3 terrorists down in 6.8 seconds. The fourth terrorist had grabbed General Morrison, used her as a shield. Weapon to her head. Stop. I'll kill her. I'll. Jean-Claude assessed. Distance, 7 meters. Angle. Hostage completely blocking center mass shot. Available target. Terrorist's right eye socket. Visible for approximately 2.3 centimeters. Difficult shot. High risk. In his prime, at 30, Jean-Claude would have taken it without hesitation. At 70, his hands weren't as steady. His eyes weren't as sharp. But 25 years of Legion training didn't disappear because you got old. Jean-Claude aimed. Breathed. Let muscle memory take over. 1 shot. The terrorist's head snapped back. He fell. General Morrison stood frozen, covered in blood that wasn't hers, staring at the 70-year-old man in a white kepi holding a smoking AK-47. Jean-Claude lowered the weapon. You are safe now, Madam General. His accent was completely gone. Perfect English. Controlled and professional. The 300 civilians who'd been on the ground slowly stood, staring, not understanding what they'd just witnessed. Sirens in the distance. French police finally arriving. Jean-Claude looked at the 4 dead terrorists, at the weapon in his hands, at the white kepi on his head. Then he looked at the graves, at the 9,387 white crosses. Vous pouvez dormir en paix, he said quietly in French. You can sleep in peace. General Morrison found her voice. Who, what, you're the groundskeeper. Oui, madam. For 32 years. Jean-Claude smiled slightly. Before that, I was Legion étrangère. 2 EREP, 25 years. The Foreign Legion? Morrison stared. How old are you? 70 years, madam. You're 70? Yes, madam. But the Legion teaches you well. The training, it does not leave. He removed his kepi blanc, held it respectfully. I apologize for the violence. But they threatened your life. They threatened these graves. That I could not permit. One of the elderly D-Day veterans, a man who had to be at least 98, struggled to his feet. His face was wet with tears. Son, the veteran said in a shaking voice, you just saved my life. Saved all of us. On the day we came to honor our brothers who didn't make it home. Jean-Claude looked at the old American soldier, saw a brother warrior, saw someone who understood duty and sacrifice and protecting the sacred. C'est mon devoir, Jean-Claude said softly. It is my duty. They died for France. For my country. The least I can do is protect their graves. The old veteran saluted. Crisp. Professional. The kind of salute one warrior gives another. Jean-Claude returned it. Equally crisp. Equally professional. 2 old men. Different countries. Different wars. Same brotherhood. The French police arrived minutes later. GIGN, France's elite counter-terrorism unit, came after that, heavily armed and tactical, only to find that a 70-year-old groundskeeper had already neutralized the threat. The commander of the GIGN unit stared at Jean-Claude, at the white kepi, at the 4 dead terrorists. Legion, he asked simply. 2 EREP, Jean-Claude confirmed. Long time ago. The commander nodded slowly. Not so long ago, it seems. He extended his hand. Thank you, ancien. Old one. A term of respect for veterans. Jean-Claude shook it. I was protecting my post. Some post, the commander said, looking at the thousands of graves. The best post, Jean-Claude replied. Over the next hours, the story emerged. The terrorists had been planning the attack for months. Sophisticated, well-funded. Their goal, assassinate 3 American generals on sacred ground on the most symbolic day of the year. Send a message about Western weakness. They'd succeeded in breaching security. They'd failed because nobody had accounted for the 70-year-old groundskeeper being a former Foreign Legion paratrooper with 25 years of combat experience. General Morrison insisted on speaking with Jean-Claude privately. They sat in the cemetery's small office. Jean-Claude had changed back into his groundskeeper's uniform. The kepi blanc was folded carefully and placed on the desk between them. I need to understand, Morrison said. You're 70 years old. You've been a groundskeeper here for 32 years. But you moved like someone a quarter your age. Fought like someone who's been doing it all their life. I have been doing it all my life, madam. Since I was 21. The Legion Étrangère. It trains you very well. And the training. He tapped his head. It stays here. The body, it slows down, yes. But the mind, the tactics, the will, these do not age. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why work as a groundskeeper when you have that kind of experience? Jean-Claude looked out the window at the graves, at the white crosses catching the afternoon light. Because these boys, he said quietly, they died for my country, for France, for freedom they never enjoyed. The least I can do is tend their graves. Make them beautiful. Make sure they are never forgotten. He picked up his kepi blanc, held it gently. The Legion taught me many things, Madam General. How to fight, how to kill, how to survive impossible situations. But it also taught me this, Legio Patria Nostra. The Legion is our fatherland. When you have no country, no family, no home, the Legion becomes all of these things. But you're French, Morrison said. You have a country. We. But for 25 years, the Legion was my family, my brothers, my reason to wake up each morning. Jean-Claude looked at her. When you retire from that, you need a new mission, a new purpose. I chose this. He gestured to the cemetery. 9,387 Americans buried here. Each one died far from home. Each one deserves to be remembered, to be honored, to have someone who cares. So you became their guardian, Morrison said softly. I became their guardian. Jean-Claude smiled slightly. Today, I was also their defender. The Legion teaches, you never abandon your post. These graves are my post. Those terrorists threatened them. I could not allow that. Morrison stood, came to attention, saluted. Jean-Claude rose and returned the salute. On behalf of the United States military, Morrison said formally, and on behalf of the 9,387 American soldiers buried in this cemetery, thank you for your service. All of it, the 25 years in the Legion and the 32 years caring for our dead. C'est un honneur, Jean-Claude replied. It is an honor that Jean-Claude Mercier still works at the Normandy American Cemetery, still arrives at 0600 hours every morning, still walks the rows, still tends each grave with obsessive care. But things are different now. American visitors recognize him, stop to thank him, ask for photos, want to shake the hand of the 70-year-old Legionnaire who stopped terrorists on sacred ground. The cemetery director tried to promote him. You could be head of security, training officer, consultant. Jean-Claude declined. I am a groundskeeper. That is my job. I will do it until I cannot. But Jean-Claude, she protested, you're 70 years old. And after what happened? I am 70 years old, Jean-Claude agreed. And I will be 71 next year, God willing. And I will still be the groundskeeper, because that is my post. Legio Patria Nostra. The Legion is our fatherland. But for Jean-Claude, in these final years, these graves had become his fatherland too. His family, his brothers, his reason to wake up each morning. On quiet days, when tourists aren't around, Jean-Claude still talks to the graves in French. Bonjour, James. Bonjour, Michael. Bonjour, Robert. He tells them about the day he protected them, about the terrorists who tried to desecrate this ground, about how he refused to let it happen. Vous pouvez dormir en paix, he says. You can sleep in peace. I am here. I am watching. Nobody will harm you. Not while I can still stand. Because warriors don't retire. They just find new missions. And Jean-Claude Mercier's mission, for however many years he had left, was to guard these American graves, to honor the boys who died so far from home, to be the warrior standing watch over the warriors who'd fallen. At 70, at 80, at 90, if God granted him the years, until his last breath. Legio Patria Nostra.